Thanks for your time this morning, everybody. Appreciate that it's fairly early in the morning, but I hope you've got yourself a coffee. We're ready to go for the next 45 minutes or so. We're just going to go through a pure introduction to why the Agile methodology is relevant for banking and financial services as a whole. If you're a financial service provider, this may be something your organisation is currently working on or is already familiar with. You may be new to the methodology or have completely no insight into the advantages or experience, or have some experience but not ready to commit yet. Everyone has a different story to tell, some good and some not so good. I'm hoping you'll gather some food for thought today, not only for the current projects that you're working on, but also projects that you're looking for into the future and some of the work programs that may have not been started yet. So a little bit of a brief agenda. So we'll do a little introduction. We'll have an overview of Agile, and then we'll go into some of the barriers for adoption, and then how maybe more competitive in the market. Why should we consider Agile as part of FSI, and the first steps to becoming Agile, and then we'll conclude with some of the key takeaways that we have on there as well. So firstly, a little introduction as to who I am. I'm Robbie there. I'm the Agile Practice Manager here at Jumar. I've been involved in a wide range of Agile projects from a number of different sectors, whether that be retail, sales, insurance, finance, probably for about 10 years now, and built up a steady war chest, should we say, of experiences that have helped me understand, when and how to adopt Agile to benefit the customers and some of the clients. So this is a new era of software development, and the Agile methodology is certainly emerging as the forefront of organisations in terms of their ways of working. Not only in your traditional IT product development, but also reaches as far wide as HR, sales, marketing. I've even seen it implemented within schools. So huge investments are granted to modernise some of these legacy applications, and new initiatives as well. Realising this value early on can certainly be difficult to achieve and interpret using some of the traditional development processes. However, to be more competitive in the market, you guys as established banks, established financial service organisations, you need to embrace a change to employ faster alternative development methods. The stats are quite shocking. 88% of global finance leaders see new technology as a threat to their existing business model. Why is that? How do you see emerging technology affecting your organisation? Additionally, 81% of banking CEOs are concerned about the speed of technological change. So that's 4 out of 5 CEOs. They're apprehensive about the speed of the change and the impact that it has on their business. This adoption of faster alternative ways of working will certainly enable you to quickly adapt to new business requirements and allow the customer or the end user to be at the forefront of all decisions and keep you up to speed with this technological change that we've just talked about now. So have a think about your organisation. Be honest. How quickly can you adjust to meet demands or customer needs, even changes in regulation? How did the pandemic affect you and your ability to meet these customer needs? Can you afford the competition to get ahead of what you're doing now? So we're only going to scratch the surface today of what Agile is. It was an approach created in 2001 by 17 organisational leaders who created the Agile Manifesto. This decided on the word Agile as it represented, the adaptiveness and responsiveness, to change and ability to respond to change during that product development, which was really important to their views and their philosophy. In its holistic form, it's about having that ability to respond to the change, especially in some of these complex and uncertain environments. But in its simplest form, it's delivering smaller increments of work a lot more frequently. As you can visualize from this overview that we've got here, it's that iterative methodology delivering value in the smaller increments, at a greater frequency right from the start of the project. Each of these is a block for each increment that we do have. We'll have a build, we'll define, we'll build, release, we'll release that value each along for each iteration there. You know, the waterfall or the traditional project management that we've discussed is it's more sequential. You know, tasks are generally handled in a linear process. So we'll have a certain period where we'll define, we'll get some of the requirements gathering, and then we'll move on to the development as part of this build, and then we'll move on to the testing of it, and then we'll move on to the release. And it's a lot more over time, and you'll typically only see the value right at the end of that project. With this, as you're receiving the value right, you focus more on delivering a completed product, you know, from that defined scope, what we define right from the off. And you know, the success is measured whether this was on time, whether it was on budget, and to the original scope, whether that might be 12, 18 months prior. But of course, experience has told us that this seldom happens, whether it be on time and on budget. You know, delivering the agile way in terms of in increments instead of all at once allows for regular feedback. So at each of the end of the increments, even during the increments, we'll receive these feedbacks. We'll have these feedback loops where we'll constantly be in interaction with stakeholders, end users about that direction that we want to go. You know, you get a working product at the end of each increment. So if there's any changes, any adaptations that we need to make, we can make them fairly easily after each of these iterations. You know, the market and the client behaviors are changing so fast that this approach allows us to look at some of the pain points in a micro fashion, really, and build on them incrementally throughout the whole of the time of the project or engagement, rather than looking at that completed goal right towards the end. You know, we could build, maybe we could build an MVP on there and respond to those changes. Then we can iterate and improve on each along the way. You know, it reduces that time to market that we do have. You know, we could, rather than going to market towards the end of the project here, we could go to the market very early on, receive that feedback, get those feedback loops, get that interaction, get the buy-in from the clients or the end users or stakeholders, and builds that customer interaction, that engagement that's so key. You know, some of the larger cutting-edge organisations, which we'll come on to later, you know, exploited these opportunities to their advantage in order to build the products first with the customer minds first, customer engagement first and foremost. You know, in doing so, it assumes that if we do encounter any of the problems, if we do encounter any risk, that we can build on it and we can inspect it along the way after end of each iteration, not only to meet the customer expectation, but also if we have any problems along the way with hardware, software, with any budget, with any of the teams, you know, we can address them a lot sooner and a lot more efficiently. You know, you can mitigate, you know, due to that iterative nature, we can mitigate risks early. As you can see, that within a waterfall project, because we're kind of ignoring them, because we're going off a defined scope, the risks just build and build and build, and before you know it, you get to the end and you're overcome with those risks. As opposed to working iteratively, you know, we can see that if it does rises, we can bring it down again and we can mitigate it. It may rise again, but we can bring it down because we're working iteratively on that. So, as much as an agilist I am, it's certainly worth pointing out that there are some barriers that organisations have faced when considering agile for their organisations. I have highlighted that each journey will be different, and rightly so, but there are definitely some common barriers or pitfalls that will need to be part of the conversation when adopting agile. So whilst there undoubtedly more than what we'll discuss now, highlighting a few of the obstacles, some of the shared experiences that we've got, helps to give a bit more of a rounded approach, and expectations can be managed at that point. So evidently, regulation, there's a huge focus on regulation within the industry, you know, and adopting agile could be perceived as being risky. as a result, some of the organisations that we've worked with have often continued with that waterfall methodology, or what they already know, the apparent tried and tested approach of these traditional practices, have the opinion to be more predictable with those defined outcomes to meet those regulatory changes. It's also worth mentioning that the audit compliance is quite extensive, and due diligence may have caused organisations to remain in that traditional way of working, where there is a lot of that physical documentation. It's extremely broad. The Agile Manifesto that we just talked about, it states that it values working software over comprehensive documentation, and sometimes it can be deemed that working in an agile way means that there is no documentation. However, it's inaccurate, that view, because what it's actually saying is that it values that working software over the documentation rather than just ignoring it. So how much you apply that that methodology, it's up to you and where you get that value out of it. Excuse me. And that financial regulation, again, it's so severe that even the smallest error can cause a loss of thousands or even millions of revenue, or potentially worse, a dented reputation. The technology cannot fail. This is why we see many of the organizations adopting that traditional way of working, going through multiple work streams of QA, multiple, you have a large amount of testing just to verify everything before we actually go to release. And it can be quite a high stress period as well for everybody. Whereas if we're working agile, it promotes that each iteration delivers that value, and it's built on the previous increment as well. So it's thoroughly verified along the way, as opposed to right at the end, from that QA perspective. And we can go to live at any point once that's ready. Ensuring that you work incrementally and that it works with the prior increment on that as well. It minimizes that regression test period, because that the previous version works. You've built up a suite of automation, for example, that can verify not only the previous versions but the latest versions as well, and it all should be considered done. And eradicating that behavior of needing the endless amount of testing after you've done some development or verification, however that may be. It's not a behavior that can change overnight. It's obviously something that, if you were to adopt Agile, we would have to work closely and understand the needs and have change that lifestyle in order for it to be sustainable. So the second point as well on here is cost. And some of the things that I've talked to some customers about, some clients about, is that, and quite rightly, everybody's driven by cost analysis. Building a development budget for a set period of time with an apparent outcome, in the essence, it is waterfall, as it provides a certain amount of upfront clarity on forecasting. And as we've discussed, that iterative approach of development doesn't really fit into the view of guaranteeing what the product will look like for example, in 12 months' time. So the barrier here is obtaining a budget for, using 12 months as an example, without having a fully defined specification. That requires a shift in thinking for whoever's going to pay the bill, really. So if you still need to apply a budget or approve a budget for 12 months, it's certainly possible. But to understand the value, it's incrementally reviewed rather than just completing the project over a period of time towards a set scope. Understand that things may change. Appreciate that those things that change could be scope, could be value. Everything evolves over time. 12 months is a long time in any sector, and to build a set of requirements from that was last year up until now. Look how things have changed. Risk management is a word never too far away from places that I've worked in and places that we're familiar with. It's perceived that the lack of outcome is, that predictability on the outcome is not too quickly embraced. The last one I would want to talk to, there's a couple of points on this in terms of that organizational size. Traditional banks and financial services industries, have a real departmental segregation that work individually on a single entity. And there will be challenges, coordinating them as a group and building those cross-functional teams. For example, how do departments such as design, maybe analysis, development, testing, the release teams, how do they work together? They might be distributed across different time zones or even continents, and overcoming this is crucial in building those teams. So whilst not directly related to organizational size, another challenge is the structure of the applications, which typically over time may interface with multiple systems and have heavy dependencies across each of the applications. As a result, careful consideration and definitions beforehand are required. Yet pure Agile could be alleged to not suit these intricate applications as the complexity needs to be understood way in advance. Yet, as we've talked about, the more complex, the greater impact of adoption of Agile is. It's due to those smaller increments and having cross-functional teams that can discuss and understand each of the requirements and how these applications interface with each other and how the systems work together, rather than having a discussion with one team over here and a discussion with one team over here. That cross-functional team allows those conversations to happen seamlessly. Yeah, like anything in life, there's pros and cons to the decisions that we decide to do. Adopting Agile is no different, hence why I've put some of these barriers on here. Yet, in spite of the challenges, there's certainly a growing number of financial services firms that are choosing to transition to Agile as they understand these barriers up front and what they can do and prepare for that shift in thinking. So, in today's world, remaining competitive and ahead of the market, it's more crucial than ever. Financial institutions that they're facing huge changes in these technological platforms, some of the payment processing systems, financial systems, assets and risk management systems, while attempting to deliver services in the way that the customer prefer. So businesses you also face some of the regulatory changes, and it might require some compliance and some other financial directives. Combine these with the recent volatility over the market over the past 18 months, then the need to sustain revenue growth and retain that market share in an increasingly competitive sector, there's no doubt a burden to improve that efficiency and speed while maintaining some of those costs as well. So in order to maintain, in order to be more competitive in the market, we need to deliver quality at speed. So there's 2 points there. There's the quality and at speed. So think about some of the organizations that have bought a new culture of delivering quality at speed. You think about Amazon, Facebook, Tesla, Apple, the list is endless. These are all market leading ones. They're not alone. There are some high profile banks as well and insurance companies, which I'm sure you're familiar with, that you could consider cutting edge, who are able to quickly and consistently push those boundaries to meet the market and the customer needs. The second point, maintaining flexibility in your business. I mentioned earlier that we live in a world of constant change. Every day that landscape is shifting, which not only affected digital businesses, but pretty much every business across the globe. New technology, competitors, customer expectations. These requirements are emerging every day. Therefore, each organization, we must learn to be flexible, enabling each other to change that focus as and when necessary, instead of attempting to maintain that fixed long-term 5-year, 1-year, 2-year, 5-year approach, which, as you know, could lead to massive budget waste and the implementation of an obsolete technology. Think about how you can keep pace with your competitors and customer expectations and those technology. Flexibility in this case means having achievable aims and targets without those concrete long-term plans. It's fine to have those targets and it's encouraged to continue to have those targets, but without that defined scope up front. Making decisions to fund projects with a shorter timescale, in order to keep the options open, allow room for change without investing hefty amounts of cash. You can still achieve the longer term plan, but the objective here is to be in a position to facilitate that change. But there's many ways to reach a desired outcome, so keep those options open, and have that space for maneuver as well if need be. And one of the important ones that a lot of people that I work with will realise, what I talk about quite a lot, is that value focused delivery. Organisations that are focused on growth and how this scales across the departments, and with this growth comes a long list of things they want to achieve. Well, what I've noticed is the common struggle of being able to being able to put things in a priority order. What should be working on next? And that it's a real, organisations might have real great policies and procedures. Everyone knows what they're doing, but not really have true focus on the value that it brings. This becomes a huge problem, because we can end up delivering products or projects that have no uptake or very little interaction with the intended audience. No one even uses it, or even worse, the final project or the product, it doesn't generate nearly half, or in some cases less, the cost of what it was invested to create it in the first place. It's crucial here to understand what value means in your organisation, as each organisation will be different, and could be related to whether that be the customer uptake, number of subscriptions, revenue even. But facilitating decisions based on the value is crucial. Following these outcomes will enable organisations to quickly adapt to new business requirements. Allowing, what we mentioned quite a lot, is allowing the customer or that end user to be at the forefront of the decisions as well. So the organisations that I've worked with are discovering that in order to keep up with these new demands in industry competition, these traditional approaches for delivering products or projects and services are rarely met. What's needed is that shift in thinking, strategizing, and more importantly, ways of working to help companies survive and stay in the game. So why the Agile methodology for banking and FSI? So all organisations face challenges, some larger, some have a greater impact, and some more difficult than others. But what's important here is that a workforce not only has the visibility of these, but also feels empowered to make some of the positive changes. Agile proposes an ability to continuously improve and to inspect and adapt towards each issue towards delivery, learn from the past experience, creating that sustainable, robust model. Each of these is an iteration. Each of these will have a learning outcome of them. Each of these we will learn from past experience, reduce that risk over time, creating that sustainable model. Everybody knows the behaviours within the team, what's expected. We have accountability within those. So thinking back to the slide on how to be more competitive in the market, businesses can use Agile to understand where they need to invest in the products, how they can generate a return on investment based on the value that they've defined, and in turn, how they continuously amaze and retain their customers as well. The methodology is still relatively fresh in the world of banking and financial services industries, certainly compared to some of the traditional startup and development teams as well. Yet many organisations have felt that due to some of those in-house development systems, mergers, acquisitions, potentially aging core platform, access to data comes with intricacies not faced with many of their new tech competitors. But it could be perceived as a risk for organisations looking to adopt a new way of working. However, as you can see, risk is significantly reduced when adopting Agile. We're able to realise it early, do something about it. Whilst valiant efforts were made on some large organisations, some large organisations have certainly succumbed to some of these cutting-edge competitors that have disrupted the market. We look at how Netflix, how they came into the market, how they changed the way of thinking, and kind of unfortunately took over a favourite of mine, Blockbuster. You know, how that change of plan worked, how they were able to meet the customer needs quickly. You know, we look at Spotify taking over potentially HMV. We look at Apple and Samsung, how they've shifted from the traditional organisation of Nokia, for example. You know, with time, you know, banks have performed some of these large IT have performed some of these large innovative technologies, and certainly felt enormous and some of these costly malfunctions as well. You know, because there is that standard shift, customer expectations are growing at certainly a much faster rate than they ever have been. You know, it's hard to prepare everything before time. That's why it's important to maintain that flexibility. You know, your real change comes from within. The success of technology firms today and the best hopes for banks tomorrow depends on refocusing that development, not to solidify the organization, but to be able to adapt to the customer. You know, we've talked about one of the huge benefits of Agile is the ability to focus on satisfying the customer needs first, rather than merely building products and back-end technologies. We want to see that value. You know, the customer is involved right from the start, has the buy-in for some of the functionality that you're building, and incrementally see an improvement in that customer experience as well. You know, banks hold a substantial competitive advantage when it comes to depth, timeliness, and the personal level of the customer data they possess. You know, harnessed some of these powerful analytics. You know, in doing so, Agile enables that swift and flexible development of applications that use this data, continuously creating and refining such customer-focused products will help banks demonstrate that you know your customers, that you understand their needs, and you can suggest the most relevant offers maybe at the right time, the most relevant offers, products, everything, all at the right time. So we've talked about reduction of risk. So as we're incrementally reducing the risk with every iteration, you know, the fast feedback loops allow you to further reduce this product risk by providing the customers what they want, what they value, what they need. You know, it gives that risk visibility throughout the development cycle, the delivery cycle. You know, right from inception all the way through to that customer delivery. You know, you continuously eliminate waste from the processes or the products or whatever you decide to do, right from the off. You know, as you produce your products, you're reducing that risk. You can see that line coming down. So I'd just like to point out a recent report called the Money Pit. It's produced by the Standish Group, and they studied two very large software products done at two very similar sized mature companies. You know, one project was done with Agile, which they describe as lean, and one with waterfall, which they categorized as fat. It's not my terminology, but the results they found were quite astounding, really. You know, the Agile project was, to quote, 4 times cheaper than the cost of the equivalent waterfall project. It was delivered with high user satisfaction, whilst the water project, and to quote, had a watered down critical function and the high value feature was not part of the delivered application. So they spent all this money, it was late, and it wasn't actually what they wanted at the end of it. You know, one of the major tools that the Standish Group used for this report is the metric system, which they called StanMex, which are not cost representative, not actual monetary value. So I think that looking at these, I think the actual cost is 3 million on that one. Yet you can see from the indicative differences in the differences between the actual and the true cost of each implementation. It's quite vast. You know, not only is the actual cost a lot lower, but the true cost was lower also, meaning the return on investment for the Agile project was seen significantly sooner, and the project had effectively paid for itself after a 2-year engagement, whilst the waterfall organisation had estimated that the system payback would probably break even in 20 years. So the experience and evidence is there to suggest that Agile is a quicker, cheaper, and more value focused than traditional ways of working. So becoming Agile. So where do we start? So Agile development is just one avenue to transform your organization and to trigger that change. But what I would say is, don't believe anybody that tells you that there's a one-size-fits-all answer. There isn't. Similar to analogy that I use, it's like a game of chess. There are guidelines and there are rules of play that each game must follow. Yet each game is very different, and it's not too dissimilar from adopting Agile. Becoming Agile isn't an outcome; it's a philosophy. There's no end goal where you get a certificate or a grading based on becoming an Agile organization. To truly become Agile, you must include these, what we consider these 5 crucial elements: strategy, structure, people, process, and technology. So look at all of these areas and how your organization can become Agile rather than just doing Agile. Firstly, the people. What we can achieve this by building these cross-functional and self-managed teams that have the dynamic skills, knowledge, tools in place for them to truly own that change and able to deliver on that vision independently. Of course, priorities will change, the vision may change, even the team composition may change, yet this is de-risked or mitigated by forming some of these sustainable team behaviours or processes to ensure that we remain confident in the quality that the teams produce. For instance, one of these behaviours in creating we would create a criteria of what we define as done. Have you ever asked the question, is this piece of work completed, and not really understand what the state is? Typically it would be yes, it's done, but it's a common response that I see. It's quite ambiguous. Is the development done? Is the QA complete? Is it merged to an integration environment or an environment that we suggest? Has the test data been created? Whatever that may be. What we'd look at doing is ensuring we have a criteria that must be met before a work item, which is often considered a user story, is considered done. It provides clarity for everybody. This is just one of a few very important behaviours that the team produce, and the significance of them, of truly understanding what is done. It can't be underestimated. Take a look at strategy, for example. An agile-minded organisation focuses on the what, less on the how, when it comes to delivering on that vision. Now, it might seem obvious that the first place we'd start to look in an agile transformation is the development teams, and you'd probably be right. This is an area where you'd see a lot of quick wins and high value returns in such a short space of time. However, experience of success at that team's level, we'd looked at the wider organisation. How can you speed up the decision making? How can you give the teams the best possible platform to thrive? Each adoption and each organisation will be different. The best approach for you won't necessarily be the best approach for others. This would depend on the starting position that you are. Some organisations are a bit more advanced in the journey, while others are just starting out, and it's important to appreciate this is part of your thinking. Long term, be clear about where you're starting and where you are and what the roadmap is. These are all these ones that we've discussed, and these are all very good starting points and would define you as agile. No matter how far you are on the journey, but they are excellent starting points. So, like I said, there's a few of the key takeaways. So it is important to understand that there's no one size fits all when it comes to agile, and the need for change will be different for every organisation. However, I think one thing that we can all agree on is that traditional ways of working requires a shift in thinking in order to keep pace with market trends, competitors, technology. And the banking world is no different. It's evolving. The current landscape is being stretched. This growth requires professional leaders like yourself to be influential, to facilitate that new culture in their organizations, focusing on that value-driven environment, one that enables and encourages employees to continuously inspect ways of working and adapt to our ever-changing and uncertain world. One of common goals and a common direction. You look at agile transformation as a journey and not as an outcome. We've discussed that agile is primarily about delivering quality at speed, but don't rush into changing everything at once. People and teams, they will require time to try new things, implement their ideas and new ways of working. Don't aim to have that perfect model right from the off, even if that perfect model does exist. Give the teams the space and the freedom to figure out their own ways of working, what's guiding them through the main principles and allowing for differences of opinion, and these are all key to achieving that sustainable change. Of course, we discussed creating that alignment across the teams to be able to sustain this change, create that transparency and collect that feedback between the senior leadership, some of the product owners, the scrum masters that are on there potentially, some of the team members, stakeholders, even suppliers, end users. Make sure that the benefits are clear to everybody. Be open enough to discuss some of these obstacles and apprehensions that the teams may have. Facilitate some of those, and you'll be amazed at the solutions that emerge as a result of that. And lastly, continue the journey and don't stop. True agile transformation, it is that change of thinking that will impact each and every person in your organization. Of course, you will have hurdles and challenges to overcome, yet learn from these, adapt. Continuous improvement and reflection will allow better understanding of your customers, how you deliver value quickly, how you receive and engage with that feedback. These fundamentals at an organization will bring truly amazing results. In the end, it's about creating an environment where your people have the platform to accomplish their best, and everything else will follow, including seeing some of these truly amazing results and deliver some of that value. So how seriously you take it, it's up to you, but you have the ability and the opportunity to change for the better. So thank you. So that covers a brief introduction to Agile, and specifically its introduction to banking and FSI. Of course, this is just the tip of the iceberg yet, and there's so much more we could discuss in order to bring that value to your delivery. If you are interested in speaking to myself or one of our Agile specialists about how Agile could benefit you and your organization, then please send an email to info@jumartechnology.com and reference this webinar, and we'll certainly be in touch. So I really appreciate your time today. Hoping this is giving you some food for thought. So enjoy your day. Thanks again, and thank you.